The morning sun cast long shadows across the chosen set in Utah, but Jonathan Roumie felt none of its warmth. Standing alone in his Jesus costume, he gazed at the recreated streets of ancient Jerusalem, yet his heart carried a weight that seemed to grow heavier each day. The flowing robes that had once felt like a sacred calling now hung on his shoulders like a burden he could barely carry. For 3 years, he had embodied the Son of God on screen, speaking words of hope and healing to millions around the world. Fans would stop him on the street, tears streaming down their faces, thanking him for bringing Jesus to life in their living rooms. But here, in the quiet moments between takes, Jonathan wrestled with a truth that made him feel like a fraud. His faith, once pure and simple like a child's, had become complicated, analytical, distant. He remembered being 7 years old, kneeling beside his grandmother's bed as she taught him to pray. Back then, God felt as real as the morning breeze, as close as his own heartbeat. But somewhere between seminary discussions and theological debates, between studying the historical Jesus and portraying the divine Christ, that childlike certainty had slipped away like sand through his fingers. Now, when he prayed, the words felt hollow. When he spoke Christ lines on camera, a voice in his head whispered, "Do you even believe what you're saying?" The more he learned about faith intellectually, the more his heart seemed to shut down spiritually. It was as if his mind had built walls around his soul, protecting it from disappointment but also blocking out the very light he desperately needed. This morning was particularly difficult. He had tried to pray in his trailer before the first scene, but the familiar doubts crept in immediately. Was he just an actor playing a role? Or was there something deeper? Did his portrayal of Jesus mean anything if his own relationship with God felt so mechanical, so empty? Jonathan closed his eyes and attempted once more to connect with the divine presence he had known as a child. "God," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast outdoor set. "I know I'm supposed to have answers. People look at me and think I have it all figured out, but I feel so far from you. Help me remember what it was like to simply trust, to simply believe without needing to understand everything." The prayer felt stilted, intellectual rather than heartfelt. Even his conversations with God had become formal presentations rather than intimate exchanges. He opened his eyes and sighed deeply, running his hand through his hair beneath the crown of thorns prop sitting nearby. It was then that he heard the distant rumble of vehicles approaching the set. The Make-A-Wish Foundation had contacted the production weeks ago about bringing a special visitor today. Jonathan had agreed immediately, of course. Meeting young fans was always a privilege, especially those facing serious illnesses, but today he wondered if he had anything genuine to offer a child who might be looking for hope. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the edge of the set, and Jonathan watched as several adults emerged. Coordinators, medical personnel, family members, all moving with the careful choreography that surrounds a seriously ill child. Then, from the middle vehicle, a small figure appeared. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with wispy blonde hair partially hidden beneath a colorful knit cap. Her face was pale, her frame fragile, but her eyes sparkled with an energy that seemed to illuminate everything around her. She wore a bright yellow t-shirt with a cartoon sun that declared miracles happen every day, and despite her obvious physical weakness, she practically bounced with excitement. "Is that really him? Is that really Jesus?" Her voice carried across the set, pure and melodious, cutting through Jonathan's spiritual fog like sunlight through clouds. The Make-A-Wish coordinator, a kind woman named Sarah, approached Jonathan with the entourage. "Jonathan, I'd like you to meet Emma. She's been watching The Chosen with her family, and meeting you has been her biggest dream." Emma broke away from the group and ran toward Jonathan with surprising speed for someone in her condition. She stopped just a few feet away, her eyes wide with wonder, studying his face with the intense curiosity that only children possess. "Are you the real Jesus?" she asked, her head tilted slightly to one side. The question hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Here was the same innocent inquiry he had wrestled with privately for months, spoken aloud by a child who had no idea how deeply it would pierce his heart. His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak at all. He began, then stopped. How could he explain to this beautiful, dying child that he was just an actor struggling with his own faith? How could he tell her that the man she thought was Jesus often questioned whether Jesus was even listening? I play Jesus on television, he finally managed, his voice barely steady. But I'm just a regular person named Jonathan. Emma's smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew brighter. That's okay, she said, with the matter-of-fact wisdom that seems to come naturally to children facing extraordinary circumstances. God picked you to show people what Jesus looks like, didn't he? That means you're special. Her words struck him with unexpected force. In her simple, unquestioning faith, she saw a divine purpose where he saw only professional obligation. Her trust was so complete, so unguarded, that it made his own complicated theological wrestling seem suddenly small and self-indulgent. Would you like to see the set? Jonathan asked, grateful for something concrete to offer. Yes. Can you show me where Jesus taught people, and where he healed the sick people? As they walked together through the reconstructed streets of Capernaum, Emma's excitement was infectious. She asked questions with the rapid-fire enthusiasm of childhood. Did Jesus really walk on water? Did it feel scary? Do you think he ever got tired? What was his favorite food? But then, as they paused near the replica of the synagogue, her questions became deeper, more profound. Jonathan, she said, using his real name with the easy familiarity of a child, do you think Jesus still does miracles today? He looked down at her upturned face, so hopeful, so trusting. Here was a little girl facing terminal cancer, asking him about miracles. The irony wasn't lost on him. She was seeking confirmation of God's active presence in the world from a man who had been questioning that very thing for months. He started, then stopped. The honest answer would have been filled with doubt and theological complexity. But looking into Emma's eyes, something shifted inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in months, his response came not from his head, but from his heart. Yes, Emma, I believe Jesus still does miracles today. Sometimes they're big and obvious, and sometimes they're small and quiet. But I think maybe the biggest miracle is when someone like you reminds someone like me what faith is supposed to look like. Emma beamed and, without warning, wrapped her thin arms around his waist in a hug that nearly knocked him over with its emotional intensity. In that moment, Jonathan felt something crack open inside his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked for far too long. But even as warmth flooded his heart for the first time in months, a shadow of concern crept into his mind. This beautiful child, so full of life and faith and joy, was fighting a battle that statistics said she would lose. The medical team standing nearby, the careful way her parents watched her every movement, the Make-A-Wish visit itself, all reminders that Emma's time might be very limited. As if reading his thoughts, Emma looked up at him with those extraordinary eyes and whispered, "Don't worry about me, Jonathan. I'm not scared. Jesus is taking care of everything." Over the next 3 hours, something extraordinary began to unfold on the chosen set. What had started as a standard Make-A-Wish visit transformed into something that would challenge everything Jonathan thought he knew about faith, innocence, and the power of childlike trust. Emma approached every moment with wonder that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. When Jonathan showed her the wardrobe tent filled with biblical costumes, she gasped with delight at the intricate robes and sandals. But it wasn't the costumes themselves that captured her attention, it was the stories behind them. "This is what Peter wore when he walked on water?" she asked, running her small fingers over the rough fabric of a fisherman's tunic. "Was he scared when he looked down and saw all that water under his feet?" Jonathan found himself drawn into her questions in a way he hadn't expected. "I think he might have been," he answered thoughtfully, "but maybe that's what made it so brave. Faith isn't about not being scared, it's about trusting even when you are scared." Emma nodded with the solemn understanding that seemed far too mature for her years. "Like when I go to the hospital for treatments, I get scared sometimes, but I know Jesus is holding my hand even when I can't see him." Her matter-of-fact acceptance of both fear and faith simultaneously struck Jonathan like lightning. Here was a child who understood paradox intuitively, something he had been wrestling with intellectually for years. She didn't need to resolve the tension between doubt and belief, she simply held both with equal honesty. As they walked through the set, Emma began asking questions that cut straight to the heart of faith itself. Not theological questions or doctrinal debates, but the kind of pure, direct inquiries that only come from a soul unencumbered by adult complications. "Jonathan, when you pray, Do you really think God hears every single word? The question caught him off guard. In his months of spiritual struggle, his prayers had felt like words thrown into an empty sky. But looking at Emma's expectant face, he found himself considering the question fresh. I hope he does, Jonathan answered honestly. Sometimes it feels like he's listening, and sometimes it doesn't. What about you, Emma? What do you think? Oh, I know he hears everything, she said with absolute certainty. Sometimes when I'm praying at night, I can almost feel him leaning in closer to listen better, and when I say thank you for something good that happened, I think I can see him smiling. Her confidence wasn't arrogant or naive. It was simply unshakable. She spoke about God the way other children might talk about their best friend, with natural intimacy and complete trust. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress or convince. It was just truth as she experienced it. Can I tell you a secret? Emma whispered, tugging on Jonathan's costume sleeve to bring him down to her level. He knelt beside her, struck by how thin her arms looked in the bright afternoon sun. Of course. Sometimes when I'm really sick and the medicine makes me feel terrible, I pretend that Jesus is sitting right next to my hospital bed, and I talk to him just like I'm talking to you right now. And you know what? I never feel alone anymore. The simplicity of her faith was staggering. Where Jonathan had been searching for complex theological answers to explain God's presence or absence, Emma had found the divine in imagination and conversation. Her spirituality wasn't dependent on doctrine or proof. It was relational, immediate, and utterly real to her. As the day progressed, Jonathan began to see his own spiritual journey reflected in Emma's innocent wisdom. When she asked, "Do you think Jesus ever felt sad when people didn't believe him?" Jonathan realized she was articulating his own deepest fear, that his doubt might somehow disappoint God. But Emma's follow-up question shattered that fear entirely. But even if he felt sad, he probably just loved them more, don't you think? That's what my mom does when I'm grumpy. Love as the response to doubt. Grace as the answer to uncertainty. These weren't theological concepts to Emma, they were lived realities, as natural as breathing. Around mid-afternoon, as they sat together on the steps of the recreated synagogue, Emma surprised Jonathan by asking if she could pray for him. "Pray for me?" he asked, genuinely startled. "Emma, I should be praying for you. Why can't we both pray for each other?" she asked with perfect logic. Jesus probably likes it when his friends take care of each other. Before he could respond, Emma closed her eyes and placed her tiny hand on his much larger one. Her prayer was unlike anything Jonathan had heard in years of church services and theological discussions. "Dear Jesus, thank you for letting me meet Jonathan today. He's really nice and he makes you look kind and gentle on TV, which is exactly right because that's how you really are. I can tell he loves you a lot, but maybe sometimes he worries that he's not doing it right. Can you help him remember that you just want him to be his real self? And can you help him feel how much you love him, even when he can't feel it? And Jesus, thank you for giving me such a good day. I feel really happy right now. Amen." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears as Emma's prayer washed over him. She had somehow identified and addressed his deepest spiritual struggle without him saying a word about it. Her prayer wasn't sophisticated or eloquent, but it carried a power that years of formal worship had failed to provide. It was the prayer of someone who actually expected to be heard, who spoke to God as naturally as she might ask her father for a glass of water. "Thank you, Emma," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're welcome." Sometimes grown-ups forget that talking to Jesus is supposed to be easy, not hard. Her observation hit him like a revelation. In his pursuit of theological sophistication, he had indeed made faith complicated when perhaps it was meant to be simple. Not simplistic, but simple. Direct, honest, trusting. As the afternoon wore on, the medical team began showing signs of concern. Emma's energy, which had seemed boundless earlier, was beginning to flag. Her breathing became slightly labored, and she leaned more heavily against Jonathan as they sat together. Dr. Martinez, the oncologist who had accompanied Emma on the visit, approached discreetly. "We should probably start thinking about heading back soon," he said quietly to Sarah, the Make-A-Wish coordinator. "Emma's had a wonderful day, but we don't want to push too hard." Jonathan overheard the exchange and felt his heart clench with worry. He had become so caught up in Emma's infectious joy that he had almost forgotten the reason for her Make-A-Wish visit in the first place. The reality of her condition crashed back over him like a cold wave. But if Emma was tired, she showed no signs of wanting the day to end. "Jonathan, can I ask you something really important?" she said, looking up at him with those luminous eyes. "Anything, sweetheart. If Jesus could heal anyone he wanted to, and he loved everyone so much, why do you think some people don't get healed right away?" The question was devastating in its innocence and profundity. Here was a dying child asking one of the oldest theological questions in existence, and she was asking it without bitterness or accusation, simply with genuine curiosity. Jonathan felt the weight of her trust in his answer. How could he explain suffering to someone who was living it with such grace? How could he address divine healing to a child whose own healing seemed medically impossible? "I don't know, Emma," he said finally, choosing honesty over false comfort. "I wish I had a good answer for that. I think it's one of those mysteries that even grown-ups struggle to understand." "That's okay," she said, patting his hand comfortingly. "I think maybe sometimes the healing looks different than we expect. Like maybe the healing isn't always about making the body better. Maybe sometimes it's about making the heart better, or helping people love each other more." Her insight was breathtaking. At 8 years old, facing terminal illness, Emma had grasped something about suffering and healing that had eluded theologians for centuries. She wasn't denying the reality of physical healing or minimizing the pain of illness. She was simply expanding the definition of what wholeness might look like. "Do you feel healed in that way?" Jonathan asked gently. "I think so," she nodded. "My body is pretty sick, but my heart feels really, really good. And today, meeting you and seeing where Jesus' stories get filmed, my heart feels even better. That feels like healing to me." As the sun began to set over the Utah landscape, casting golden light across the ancient-looking set, Emma's parents approached. Her mother's eyes were red-rimmed, clearly emotional about watching her daughter's joy throughout the day, but also aware that their time was drawing to a close. "Emma, honey, we need to start getting ready to go," her mother said softly. "Just a few more minutes?" Emma pleaded, then turned to Jonathan. "Will you pray with me before I go? Not for me. With me. I want to thank God for today." They stood together in the fading light, this unlikely pair, a struggling actor and a dying child, both of whom had been touched by something greater than themselves over the course of this extraordinary day. Emma took Jonathan's hand in both of hers and began to pray. "Dear God, thank you for the most wonderful day. Thank you for Jonathan and for everyone who worked so hard to make this happen. Thank you for letting me see where Jesus' stories come from, and thank you for helping me feel so much love today. Please take care of Jonathan and help him remember that you think he's perfect just the way he is. And please help everyone who watches The Chosen to feel how much Jesus loves them. Amen." "Amen," Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking. Emma hugged him one more time, and as she pulled away, she pressed something into his palm. A small wooden cross, worn smooth from handling. "This is for you," she said. "My grandpa gave it to me before he went to heaven. He said it would remind me that love never ends. I want you to have it so you can remember too." Jonathan stared at the simple cross, overwhelmed by the gift. "Emma, I can't take this. It's too precious." "That's exactly why I want you to have it," she said with a smile. "Precious things are for sharing." As the Make-A-Wish team prepared to leave, Jonathan felt an inexplicable sense of urgency, as if something important was about to be lost. Emma's visit had awakened something in his soul that had been dormant for months, a sense of wonder, of possibility, of faith that didn't require all the answers to still be real. But as he watched Emma walk slowly toward the waiting vehicles, supported by her parents and medical team, reality crashed back in. This beautiful child, who had reminded him what faith could look like, was dying. Her trust in God's goodness seemed especially poignant against the backdrop of her terminal diagnosis. Dr. Martinez approached Jonathan as the group prepared to depart. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" he said quietly. "In 15 years of pediatric oncology, I've never seen a child face what Emma's facing with such peace." "How long does she have?" Jonathan asked, barely able to speak the words. The doctor's expression grew somber. "Weeks, maybe a month or two at most. We've tried everything medically possible." At this point, we're focused on keeping her comfortable and making sure she has experiences like today. The words hit Jonathan like physical blows. Weeks. This child who had reignited his faith, who had shown him what trust looked like in its purest form, had only weeks to live. As the vehicles pulled away, Emma waved from the back seat of the middle SUV, her smile bright despite her obvious fatigue. Jonathan waved back, clutching the wooden cross she had given him, feeling simultaneously inspired and heartbroken. That night, alone in his hotel room, Jonathan sat by the window looking out at the stars. Emma's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes grown-ups forget that talking to Jesus is supposed to be easy, not hard. For the first time in months, he found himself praying, not the complicated, analytical prayers he had been struggling with, but simple, direct conversation. God, he said aloud, I don't understand why someone like Emma has to suffer. I don't understand why children get sick and die, but I saw something in her today that I want to have, that trust, that simplicity, that ability to find you even in the hardest circumstances. Help me learn from her. And please, if there's any way, please heal her. She deserves so much more time. He held Emma's cross up to the starlight, marveling at how something so small could carry such weight of love and memory. Whatever happened next, he knew that this day had changed him fundamentally. Emma's childlike faith had cracked open his adult skepticism and let the light back in. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, one question haunted him. Would her faith be enough to save her life, or would he have to learn to trust God even in the face of losing someone who had become so precious to him in such a short time? The answer would come sooner than he expected. 3 days later, Jonathan's phone rang at 3:17 a.m. He fumbled for it in the darkness of his hotel room, his heart immediately racing with the kind of dread that comes with middle-of-the-night calls. Jonathan, it was Sarah from Make-A-Wish, and her voice carried an urgency that made his stomach drop. I'm sorry to wake you, but I thought you'd want to know. Emma's in the hospital. She took a turn for the worse yesterday evening. Jonathan sat up in bed, fully awake now, clutching Emma's wooden cross that he'd kept on his nightstand. How bad is it? Her parents, they've been told to prepare for the worst. She's been asking for you. Within 2 hours, Jonathan was on a plane to Denver, his mind racing with prayers that felt more desperate than any he'd ever uttered. The child who had rekindled his faith was dying, and he felt helpless to do anything but show up. The pediatric oncology ward at Children's Hospital Denver was a place of hushed conversations and carefully managed hope. Jonathan found Emma's room at the end of a long hallway, her parents keeping vigil beside a bed that seemed far too large for her tiny frame. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but when she saw him enter the room, her face lit up with the same radiant smile that had captivated him on the set. Jonathan, you came. Her voice was weak but filled with genuine joy. Of course I came, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Kind of tired, she admitted, but really happy you're here. I've been thinking about our day on the set every night before I go to sleep. Her parents, hollow-eyed from sleepless nights and unthinkable stress, welcomed Jonathan with quiet gratitude. Dr. Martinez pulled him aside shortly after his arrival. We've done everything we can medically, the doctor said with gentle honesty. Her body is shutting down. It's a matter of hours, maybe a day at most. But I have to tell you something remarkable. She's shown no fear, no anger. She's been comforting us. That night, as Emma drifted in and out of sleep, Jonathan sat beside her bed, holding her hand and marveling at the peace that seemed to surround her even in this sterile hospital room. Around midnight, when her parents had finally been convinced to rest in the nearby family room, Emma's eyes opened and focused on him with startling clarity. Jonathan, can I tell you something? She whispered. Anything, Emma. I'm not scared about what's happening to my body. I know where I'm going, and I know who's waiting for me there. But I am a little sad about one thing. What's that, sweetheart? I'm sad that so many people think God doesn't do miracles anymore. They think miracles have to look a certain way, like making sick people better, but miracles are everywhere if you know how to look. Her words carried a wisdom that seemed to come from beyond her 8 years. What kind of miracles do you see, Emma? Like you, she said simply. Meeting you was a miracle. Not because you're famous or anything, but because God used our day together to help you remember how to talk to Him again. I could see it happening. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. She was right. Something fundamental had shifted in him since their encounter. His prayers had become conversations again. His faith less analytical and more relational. "And the miracle isn't that I might get better," Emma continued, her voice growing softer but more intense. "The miracle is that I get to go home to Jesus soon, and I'm not afraid. And the miracle is that you're going to help other people learn what I learned, that God loves us so much more than we think He does." As dawn broke over the Denver skyline, something extraordinary began to happen. Emma, who had been expected to slip away during the night, began showing signs of improvement. Her breathing, which had been labored and shallow, deepened. Her color, which had been ashen, began to return. Dr. Martinez arrived for his morning rounds to find Emma sitting up in bed, asking for breakfast. The confusion on his face was evident as he checked her charts, then checked them again. "This doesn't make medical sense," he murmured to Jonathan and Emma's parents. "Her vitals are stronger than they've been in weeks. Her blood work from this morning shows improvement across every marker we track." Over the next 48 hours, Emma's recovery accelerated in ways that left the medical team baffled. Tumors that had been growing aggressively began shrinking. Her immune system, which had been compromised by months of chemotherapy, showed renewed strength. On the third day, as Jonathan prepared to return to Utah, Emma was scheduled for new scans that would determine the extent of her improvement. The results left Dr. Martinez speechless. "I've been practicing oncology for 20 years, he told Emma's parents and Jonathan. "I've seen remissions. I've seen unexpected recoveries, but this, I have no medical explanation for what's happened to Emma. Her cancer appears to be in complete remission. More than that, it's as if her body has been completely restored." That evening, as Jonathan sat with Emma in the hospital garden, she looked at him with those luminous eyes and smiled. "You know what happened, don't you?" she said. "I think I do," Jonathan replied. "But I'd like to hear what you think." "I think Jesus decided that I had more work to do here first. And I think He wanted to show everyone that miracles still happen, but they happen His way, in His time. Not because we demand them or deserve them, but because love is bigger than anything else." As they sat together in the fading light, Jonathan felt a presence beside them that seemed as real as the bench they were sitting on. Not a vision or a dramatic appearance, but a gentle, unmistakable sense of being accompanied by divine love. In that moment of perfect peace, understanding flooded Jonathan's heart, not intellectual understanding, but heart knowledge. He suddenly comprehended 5 profound truths about the faith Emma had demonstrated. First, that children pray without the filter of doubt that adults carry, speaking to God as naturally as they breathe. Second, that a child's heart hasn't yet built barriers against receiving love, making them perfect conduits for divine grace. Third, that children expect miracles as naturally as they expect sunrise, without the resistance that comes from disappointment or cynicism. Fourth, that a child's faith is relational rather than analytical, built on love and trust rather than theology and proof. And fifth, that children believe in God's immediate presence and power, not in some distant future possibility. These weren't just observations about Emma's faith. They were invitations for his own spiritual renewal. "Emma," he said softly, "you've taught me something I thought I'd lost forever. You've shown me that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does." 6 months later, Jonathan returned to the Chosen set with a transformed heart. His portrayal of Jesus carried a new depth, a new authenticity that viewers immediately noticed, but more importantly, he carried Emma's wooden cross in his pocket every day. A reminder that sometimes the greatest miracles happen not to change our circumstances, but to change us. Emma recovered completely and became a spokesperson for childhood cancer research, traveling the country to share her story of hope. But she never forgot the lesson she had learned and taught, that miracles are not rewards for perfect faith, but gifts of love that remind us we are never alone. And Jonathan never forgot that sometimes, when we're lost in the complexity of adult doubt, God sends a child to remind us that the door to His heart is always simply love.